Hello, and thank you for joining us for U.S. apparel sourcing from CAFTA-DR and U.S. textile exports, myth versus reality. My name is Stephanie Gosens, the Senior Director of Communications at USFIA, and I have just a few housekeeping items before we get started with today's program. Please note that questions can be submitted at any time during the live program. Simply click on the question header on your webinar control panel, type your text into the box, and hit send. Our presenter will address as many questions as possible at the end of the program. If for some reason we experience a technical difficulty and lose audio, please refer to the chat box for further instructions. As a reminder, all registered participants will receive an email tomorrow with a copy of the slide deck and a recording of this webinar. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Sheng Liu, Associate Professor in the Department of Fashion and Apparel Studies at the University of Delaware, to get things kicked off for today's webinar.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Always happy to talk to members and friends of the U.S. Fashion Industry Association, especially on my favorite topics, trade and sourcing. So I'm sure that, when we're talking about trade and sourcing these days, there are some of the very hot topics in people's minds, things like how to reduce China exposure, how to address the forced labor concern, and also this one, and how to expand more apparel sourcing from Western Hemisphere, especially from members of the Central America Free Trade Agreement areas. Well, I think we share the same goal, but the question is how exactly we can expand more nearshoring from CAFTA-DR. I Google a lot, and also I use ChatGPT these days, but I didn't find many kind of fact-based findings. So there are a lot of opt-ads, but not too many fact-based findings. So this is some opportunity I see myself as a scholar can step in. Next slide, please. Yeah, so recently I had a great pleasure working with an industry group called CEPA, the Coalition for Economic Partnerships in the Americas. So they are a group of fashion brands, retailers, manufacturers, and trade associations like USFIA. So we share the same goal, how to expand more apparel and textile production and trade in the Western Hemisphere in the Americas. But this report, it is my personal and independent academic view. I'm not officially affiliated with CEPA, okay? But the purpose is to really crunch the numbers to very objectively identify the most current and also important sourcing and trade patterns in CAFTA-DR. So hoping to offer more, information to join the discussion about these very important topics. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, I think, maybe people have such an impression. So last year, 2022, was a very successful year for U.S. apparel sourcing from CAFTA-DR. However, personally, I have some different views. So this could be, like myself, could be a minority view. But, for example, if you look at trade data, actually, in 2022, CAFTA-DR members, they lost market share in the U.S. apparel import market, not gain market share, but lost some market share. Maybe you will disagree with me, and you may say, okay, look, in the fourth quarter of 2022, and also in the initial 2 months of 2023, CAFTA-DR members, they enjoying some market share growth. That's true, but also I will encourage you to think about the context. For example, okay, in the fourth quarter of 2022 and also in the first 2 months of 2023, the reason why CAFTA-DR enjoying market growth is not because we really import more from the region. It's because U.S. apparel imports from the rest of the world fell much more sharply, especially from Asia. Why? Because of economic downturn. So that's number one. Number two is, next slide, please. Yeah, if you look at what kind of products U.S. fashion brands and retailers typically import from CAFTA-DR members, and you will see something like this. So this is some data I collected, at the product level. It's not simply just the macro level trade data. You cannot really tell the difference between $1 of imports from CAFTA-DR and $1 of imports from Asia. But I look at the specific product at the stock keeping unit level, the very detailed level, to see what we typically, have, from CAFTA-DR. And you can see, CAFTA-DR is a, really, the imports from these regions really concentrate on tops and bottoms, or basically they're, basic fashion items. So understandably, these basic fashion items should be less sensitive to economic downturn. So that explains why, U.S. imports from CAFTA-DR members, they drop less significant compared with, Asian countries. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in comparison, and you can definitely tell the difference. So for U.S. apparel imports from China and from Vietnam, the product categories are much more diversified. But this is exactly the kind of the shortcoming or the bottleneck that prevents more U.S. apparel sourcing from CAFTA-DR. This is not the first time I make this point. Just like a university, how to expand enrollment. The most effective way is to add more popular majors. But the thing is, what we can import from CAFTA-DR are limited to basic items like tops and bottoms. So this is why, over the past decade, if you really see the trade pattern, there's a lack of growth. It's very stable. So import volume, the market share is very stable. But the problem is there's a lack of growth of U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR. Next slide, please. And also, there's another very popular view these days is, say, Section 301, tariff against, imports from China. And CAFTA-DR is one of the biggest winners. And still, personally, I have some different views. Why? If you look at, these are the actual products I collected, from company's website. You can see the actual products available in the market. So these tops are imported from CAFTA-DR. Next slide, please. And these are imported from China and Vietnam. Very different products, okay? Next slide, please. Yeah, likewise, these are the bottoms we import from CAFTA-DR. Mostly are jeans, right? Next slide, please. And then these are the bottoms we imported from, from Vietnam and from China. So once again, they're very different kinds of products. I won't call necessarily, they're substitutable. And this explains, when we have conversation with brands and retailers, they often say, it's not like they don't want to expand sourcing from CAFTA-DR. Just they often cannot find the products they want from the region. Okay, next slide, please. And to go a little bit deeper, this is one of my most recent studies. Okay, I checked about 16,000. It's a lot. I leveraged some industry big data tool. So I checked 16,000, unique apparel products for sale in the U.S. market, from January 2021 to March 2023, the most recent data. And about 8,000 pieces of, apparel is sourced from CAFTA-DR. So, the product label specifically mentioned they were either made in, Guatemala or El Salvador. Okay, and another 8,000 pieces they're made or imported from Asian countries, 6 largest Asian apparel exporting countries, including China, Vietnam, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia, and India. Okay, and most of the information are specifically gathered from the product label or the product description. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so first I checked the product category, and then I think that the result is highly consistent with the macro trade data. So most of the products we see among these, collected examples, imported from CAFTA-DR, they concentrated on T-shirt. It's not even just about, all different kinds of tops, but specifically, their T-shirts. Okay, and in comparison, if you look at those imports imported from Asia, the 6 Asian countries, you have much more, dresses, much more outerwear, and of course, tops except T-shirts. So much more sophisticated products, much more different kinds of products. So once again, the results underscore, U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR currently is very narrow or lack of product diversity. Next slide, please. And this can be even more relevant. I even check the fiber content. So I use the keywords. I just search, each major type of fiber. So for apparel imports from CAFTA-DR, often, or in most cases, they will contain cotton. That's understandable because they can use U.S. cotton or cotton made in Mexico or somewhere. And polyester also, is very popular. Or the supply of such fabrics, the supply of such fiber, seems okay. However, you can see, for these apparel imports from CAFTA-DR, much fewer, compared with those imported from Asia, much fewer contain fibers like nylon, fibers like linen, wools, spandex, those little bit more specialized or a little bit more sophisticated fibers. So this explains, often, fashion brands and retailers cannot find enough fabrics, enough textile raw materials from the region. I think, the results, echo the, fashion brands, retailers' long-time concerns. Next slide, please. And also you can see, different types of products we import from CAFTA-DR versus Asia, or how fashion brands and retailers, they see the region, as a sourcing base, their unique strength. So if we, divide the products by the specific segments, and you can see most of the products imported from CAFTA-DR, they focus on mass and value market. Kind of we leverage, or we want to take advantage of their relatively low, cost. It may not necessarily be the production cost, but really the cost advantage. Okay. In comparison, over half of products imported from Asia, they focus on the luxury and also the premium markets, or much more higher priced. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah. So this is the reality, compared with, sourcing, all the products imported from Asia versus imports from CAFTA-DR. And related, this is from the study I collaborated with CEPA. So, indeed, U.S. fashion companies, they're trying to source more products from CAFTA-DR. But at the same time, kind of reflecting the bottleneck they face, especially from the textile side, you can see the percentage of imports that did not claim the duty-free benefits. It kept rising. Okay, kept rising. In 2022, nearly 1/3 of U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR, they forego the CAFTA-DR benefits. Okay, and actually, I checked the data in the first 2 months of 2023. It's even worse. So that's a big problem. That's a big concern. Next slide, please. Yeah, and people may so there can be two kind of questions. One is why companies did not claim the duty-free benefits. I think this is exactly we need to investigate further. We can talk to companies to figure out, what exactly happened. My guess is because companies are they're trying to import different kinds of products beyond just tops and bottoms from CAFTA-DR, but they face the problem of meeting the rules of origin requirements because of the lack of textile supply in the region. And another kind of comment is, does the previous slides mean that companies do not care about the benefits, the duty-free benefits when importing from CAFTA-DR? The answer is no. So this slide shows the results from a recent survey study. I think we conducted a survey at the beginning of 2022. You can see the vast majority of respondents say, they import from CAFTA-DR because they want to take advantage of the duty-free benefits. Okay, next slide, please. And here's another example. Okay, so so once again, I checked the data at the product level in the U.S. market. All the products, for sale from January to December 2022. and I pick up some dresses like jackets. And you can tell that truly imports from China, imports from Vietnam, they're no longer cheap. But imports from CAFTA-DR, they did not enjoy the price competitiveness compared with those imported from Bangladesh, from Cambodia. Okay, in another word, CAFTA-DR, imports, or just putting it this way, U.S. fashion brands and retailers, they need to leverage the duty-free benefits, to make CAFTA-DR apparel products more competitive in the U.S. import market. Okay, so imports from CAFTA-DR, if they do not claim the duty-free benefits, they may suffer from price disadvantage compared with some lower source, some Asian sourcing destinations, Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. And also throughout the study, we find some additional kind of interesting trends that are not necessarily the same with some common perception. For example, how the Western Hemisphere supply chain works. So the common perception is, through all means, most of the U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR members, they will use U.S.-made textiles, or U.S. is the only textile supplier for apparel made in Central America. But the data suggests, U.S. was never the only textile supplier for CAFTA-DR members. And also, it's really impossible to expect U.S. to be the only textile supplier for CAFTA-DR members. Why? Because the devil is in the detail. Indeed, if you look at the overall, say, the total U.S. textile exports, it remains number 5 in the world. But it does not mean the U.S. textile industry make all kinds of textile products. And if you look at, here the data we checked the detailed 3-digit SIPC code. So U.S. definitely still enjoying notable advantages in making yarns, for example. But if you look at fabrics, knit fabrics, woven fabrics, very few percentage of CAFTA-DR's imports came from the U.S. And this is a weakness. And I don't think given the current state of the U.S. textile industry, given their focus on much more high-tech driven, much more capital intensive industrial textiles and medical textiles, the trend will reverse easily. Okay, so that's the trend. Next slide, please. And also, people will say, okay, CAFTA-DR, is it they mostly just export to the U.S.? Yes. So in the past, we see U.S. kind of the only apparel export market for CAFTA-DR countries, but things are gradually changing. Actually, CAFTA-DR exports to markets outside of the U.S. enjoy much faster growth in most recent years, to Asia in particular, to Europe. So they're expanding very quickly. So definitely, if CAFTA-DR continue to diversify their export market, and they should, and they don't necessarily have to use U.S.-made textiles. So that's a very important point. The goal, just put it this way, the goal of CAFTA-DR is not to limit CAFTA-DR countries' export market just to the U.S., but rather we should find a way to encourage CAFTA-DR to build their genuine, export competitiveness, and to try to reach out to more markets around the world. Try to, just like Asian countries, try to expand more export market. And this is also the recommendation from international organizations like the World Bank, like the International Trade Center and the WTO. So a symbol of a more mature and a competitive apparel export, and the symbol of being a more competitive apparel exporter is to have a more diversified export market. Let's put it this way. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, last but not least, also, I think, our study raised a very interesting question. What are the key driving forces of U.S. textile exports to CAFTA-DR? So in particular, you can look at the data from 2015 to 2021, U.S. textile exports to CAFTA-DR members. The growth is really minimal, okay, or even they suffer some decline. But things all of a sudden changed from 2021 to 2022. Okay, and the only reason for change is not because of the rule. The rule doesn't change. The only change is the sourcing volume, the volume of U.S. apparel imports from CAFTA-DR. So what actually drives U.S. textile exports to the region? Is it because of the rule or because of the import volume, the apparel import volume? I think at least the data raise this question, and this issue deserves further examination. Yeah. The next slide, please. So in conclusion, so I don't want to make a long kind of presentation, and definitely don't want to read our report. That's boring. But I want to conclude my presentation by throwing 3 questions, like a future research agendas. The first is, I think we need to do more study to look at, the issue of CAFTA-DR's underutilization. Now, the bottom line is, do not pretend this issue does not exist. This is a problem. Okay, you can hear some of the conversation. They try to leave an impression CAFTA-DR is perfect. CAFTA-DR is, is solid, but still, the underutilization of the trade agreements is a problem that deserves more scrutiny. Okay, we need to figure out what actually happens. What are the thinking or the sourcing behavior of fashion brands and retailers, and how they want the problem to be solved. Okay, and a second, I think we need to study more how to really, leverage CAFTA-DR. Once again, not to limit what CAFTA-DR can export, where their market should be, but really how to leverage CAFTA-DR as a stepstone to improve the genuine competitiveness of these countries' apparel production and export, and help them, to reach to the broader global market. So I think this should be the ultimate goal, especially, if you want to, encourage more apparel production in the region to solve the root causes of migration, right? So why not just, encourage them to reach out to more market? And also, the last but not least, what are the key factors that drive, U.S. textile export to CAFTA-DR? How much go to the root itself, and also how much go to, the import side, and how exactly, the Western Hemisphere supply chain will evolve, given so many new investment, comes to the region, especially investing in, say, textile mills. So I think, this really, as a scholar, I'm always interested in, exploring further, these, dynamics, and also, look forward to, bring more, interesting and meaningful studies to discuss with you all. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer any questions. So, give the floor to you back, Stephanie.
Thank you, Sheng. While we are waiting for questions from our webinar participants, in the studies that you have done of CAFTA-DR, have you seen any low-hanging fruit in terms of fabrics, yarns, type of products that companies can look into diversifying to bring more in from the CAFTA-DR region?
Yeah, sure. That's a very good question. I will refer to some of the slides I mentioned during my presentation. So it looks like, once again, this region definitely have some advantages. So the supply chain definitely can be very integrated for certain products like t-shirt. The problem is, if you want to expand into different kinds of products like dresses, outerwear, right? And we know these products often does not just contain cotton. They also contain a lot of polyester, a lot of nylon, spandex, and wool products. But you can see, very few such items imported from CAFTA-DR contain these kind of fibers. And companies these days, especially if they, say brands and retailers, they do CMT sourcing. They care not just about yarn, they care a lot about fabrics. So we need to take a bigger picture about, or really go deeper to examine what type of textile materials are really lacking in the region, and really put all the options on the table. Do not simply rule out the possibility. Okay, just want to say secure this market for U.S. made textiles. If this is the goal, okay, if your goal is to simply protect this market for U.S. made textiles, then we will have much fewer options, and the problem may be more challenging to be solved. So that's my personal view. So.
Okay. Do CAFTA-DR countries have similar FTAs with Europe?
That's a very good question. I don't have the most accurate knowledge because I'm not a law professor, but from my understanding, two trends. Okay, one is European Union. Definitely, they're much more active than U.S. in reaching trade agreements. I think they already have over 40 trade agreements because I just talked to my sourcing class yesterday, so I checked their data. So they have more than 40 trade agreements, and they're definitely not ignoring this region. They're very active in reaching trade agreements with countries like Mexico, right? I think they're also exploring even more. And beyond European Union, and I would say China is very actively looking at this region. I recently did a study, very interesting. So currently, CAFTA-DR members, they actually set a relatively high tariff for their textiles. So I did a simulation. What if CAFTA-DR members, they remove their tariff for textiles? Because in theory, okay, if they want to expand more apparel production, if they can lower down their tariff for textiles, they can more easily get access to textiles made in the world and at a lower cost. And I would say some changes in the supply chain, and definitely the change would not be in the best interest of the U.S. textile industry. I'll put it this way, trade agreements will shape supply chain. If U.S. do nothing, in actual also have some consequences. So that's my kind of observation. Yeah. So we definitely need to be more proactive in leveraging. This could be a kind of really like a taboo topic, CPTPP, right? Whether U.S. should join that agreement or not, but definitely I think it's a missed opportunity, at least from the textile and apparel industry perspective. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you to Dr. Liu for joining us today and sharing with us that excellent information that he gathered. Before we go, I just wanted to remind everyone about some upcoming webinars we will be hosting. On May 2nd, we will be hosting a webinar with Greenberg Traurig on hot topics in a post-pandemic supply chain. On June 6th, we will be hosting a webinar with GDLSK on forced labor enforcement, recent experiences responding to CBP detentions. On June 15th, we will be hosting a webinar with Cotton Incorporated on microfibers, circularity, and cotton's afterlife, resources and facts for your cotton business. And don't forget that registration is open for USFIA's Washington Trade Symposium on July 19th. Make sure to take advantage of the early bird pricing while you can. As always, these and any other events can be found on the USFIA website. This does conclude today's webinar. Please do not hesitate to reach out with any additional questions. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to Dr. Liu, and we look forward to hosting you at the next USFIA event.